Hello, this is Michelle from East Ave Art, and today I'm going to show you how I painted this carrot cookie in watercolor. So I sketched right onto my Arches watercolor paper because it's a pretty simple sketch. It's almost like kind of a rounded triangle, and I got the base shape of the cookie and then kind of added a little bit of flourish for the greens that would be on top. And then once I finished that, I kind of decided to make the cookie shape a little bit more fun and playful. So I did sort of a little bit of a scallop on each side, just to kind of maybe show a segmentation in the carrot cookie. And then I'm going to take my rubber eraser, which I like this kind of eraser because it doesn't damage the watercolor paper as much as maybe the eraser that's on the top of my pencil there. Because it is rubber, it just sort of like lifts up the graphite rather than just kind of rubs it in. And since I'm working on cold press watercolor paper, it's a little bit toothier, and I want to retain that toothiness so that it has a consistent look once I put the water and watercolor down on there. So next I activate my paints with my spray bottle, and I'm going to mix up a range of colors. So there's going to be the cookie color, which has kind of got like a little bit of a yellowish creamy color to it. So I'm going to use some of that cream and yellow, and then a little bit of white to soften it. And I'm also going to mix up some oranges for like the carrot frosting that would be on the cake, as well as some greens for, the top of the carrot. So with the oranges, I have a couple of different orange colors, like one's a little bit lighter, one's a little bit darker, and it's because I'm going to want to have some like shadows and variation in the frosting color that's going to be on this carrot cake. I wanted to have a little bit of visual interest. So the first part that I'm going to do is actually just the lightest part of the cookie, which is the cookie color itself. And I'm just kind of painting around my sketch and putting that like a really kind of watery color of that cookie color down. So with this project, there's going to be a little bit of wait time because I'm going to be wanting to let this cookie color dry before I move on to any of the other colors. And obviously, like, that cookie color is going to touch all of my other colors, like the orange frosting and the green frosting as well. So something to think about when you're planning your projects is, do you want to work on another painting while this is drying? Do you want to use a drying tool? Sometimes if I'm impatient, I'll use a hair dryer. I don't have a dedicated drying tool, but a hair dryer works just as well, actually. But yeah, one thing to keep in mind is I don't want my colors to touch. So while they're still wet in this case, because I don't want the frosting to bleed into the cookie color. So as you can see, I've allowed this to dry. And now I'm adding just the lightest bit of the sort of orangey carrot frosting color that I have, just, in the center where the cookie color isn't. So at this point, I'm going to switch brushes, and I have a smaller brush. I think this is a number 2. While the carrot is still wet, I want to start thinking about adding in a little bit of the shadow color. So I put in where I want like the shadow color to be, kind of at the top of the carrot and then sort of at those segmented parts. And so I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to go back in later and add a little more depth to those shadows. But for now, I'm going to move on to the green frosting that's kind of showing like the vegetable kind of green at the top of a carrot. And one thing I'm thinking about as I'm painting this green frosting part is I really don't want the green to be like a super solid color. So I want it to look a bit very varied. So sometimes I'll kind of even pull up some of the green if I think it's like too consistently green on all parts. And then I'll kind of also drop in a little bit of green on the side, just to kind of give it a little bit of depth and dimension. And so I don't know, I just kind of play around with the colors until I'm happy with how they look. But again, I'm using that smaller brush for this more detail work. And so here's kind of what my base color looks like. So my initial bit of orange frosting color there dried, and I'm going to take my darker orange and a little bit of a thicker consistency, and I'm going to go kind of along the left side of my painting especially, and then in the center of each of those little like ribs, where I want to add a little bit of depth and shadow. And part of it is because I'm imagining that the light source is coming from the right side. So you'll see how I kind of play around with shadow there. But the main thing that I'm doing is once I put down that kind of darker color, I try to like re-wet the paint with a clean brush, or the painting with a clean brush. And I just try to like scrub it up a little bit so that I can, keep that, I guess, sense of texture and depth without it like overwhelming the painting. So you can see it's like a lot of kind of scrubbing around where I had added a little bit of that paint to make it appear a little bit smoother. I wasn't quite able to achieve that when the whole bit of that area, like the whole orange frosting area, was wet. So I'm kind of trying to recreate that by slightly getting the area damp and then dropping in the color. But then if I think the color is going, too far and I'm losing that sense of like, I guess, shadow, then I can also just wash off my brush, dry it a little bit. So you just want a damp brush and you can kind of lift up and control where the paint is going that way by sort of like lifting it. If the shadow color kind of runs too far into the rest of the carrot painting. So I'm going to just keep kind of playing around with that. And as you can see, I also touched my brush again, which sometimes I do when I'm trying to work fast, but that's not a good strategy. It's not good for your brushes long term. As I was playing around with this shadow color, I decided to add just a teensiest bit of brown into that orange so that it's a much clearer, sort of earthier shadow. And that's the color combination that I'm adding now to the carrot frosting. And at this point, I'm going to let my carrot frosting dry, and I'm going to start going in with a little bit of a thicker consistency of that green to add a little bit of shadow on the sides. I'm really trying to show that like the frosting is like higher. It's like a little bit puffier than the cookie itself. So I'm just going to kind of try to play around with like shadow and shading kind of one side of each one of these 4 green frosting bits to try to give that impression to the viewer. I also wanted to add a little bit of like fun and cuteness to my illustration, so I picked this kind of reddish orange, and I did these kind of little curly cues on the orange frosting just for a little bit of fun and visual interest. And at this point, I added in some light blue, kind of like to get like a little bit of a gray version of that cookie color, because I want to show a bit of a shadow on the left side, both the left side of the green frosting and the left side of the orange frosting, so that the viewer can kind of see that that frosting is like on top of the cookie itself. And I also added a little bit of a shadow sort of underneath those curly cues that I've put, just to show that that was like another layer of frosting that was on top of the initial layer of frosting. At this point, I got out my white gouache, which is a thicker consistency than watercolor, even though it's watercolor based. Because it's thicker, you can paint over watercolor and actually lighten it. So I wanted to show a little bit of a light reflecting off of some of this frosting, just to give it a little bit of a sense of where the light source would be coming from. And you can also see to the left of the cookie, I actually didn't film this part, but I did a very, very light shadow that you can see the cookie would be casting. And then of course the reflection, the lightest part, where you see the white reflecting that I'm putting there, is where the light source is hitting the most. So hopefully that makes sense for how deciding where your light source is can kind of help you to decide where to put highlights and shadows. And then just to kind of round it out, I decided to go in with a fine liner. I think I used like an 03 nib. I wanted this to have a very illustrative effect, so I just went ahead and traced around the cookie. And I'm not really sure. I think I got some mixed reviews when I posted about this previously. Some people kind of preferred it without the fine liner, but you can, of course, let me know in the comments which you prefer. But this really took me a long time, and I slightly sped this up, but not really. I really like to take it very slow, especially at this point in a painting. It would be really annoying if an errant pen mark ruined the whole thing. So I feel a lot of anxiety at this point of a project, because you're almost done and it's like, oh God, I just don't let me mess this up. So I took my time and went really, really slowly with tracing it over, and I was happy with the result. But keep in mind, even this is slightly faster than I was going with my tracing. And here's my finished product. I thought this was a really easy, fun project. It was kind of fun to do this time of year since we're getting close to Easter. So please hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and thanks for watching.